You ever wonder why we care so much about fitting in? Or who decides what's normal or cool or not? From high school classrooms to prison yards, we're constantly navigating social rules, most of the time without even realizing it. Welcome to Social Theory Today, where we break down the invisible forces that shape our world. Social Accreditation Theory, or SAT, is like a compass that helps us understand how society's approval or disapproval works. It's about recognizing the obvious explicit forms of validation, like getting good grades or a job promotion, as well as the more nuanced implicit forms, like a nod of approval from your boss, or that awkward moment when no one laughs at your joke. Basically, it's understanding how we give each other signals about what's acceptable, and how we respond either by fitting in or standing out. And here's the important thing. These explicit and implicit forms of validation are linked. When you win an award at school, it's not just about the trophy, it changes how people treat you. And if people treat you well, you're more likely to stick to what's been accredited. These little social cues push us toward conformity, shaping not just our behavior, but our sense of self. We all experience these dynamics in school. Whether you're the straight-A student or the class clown, you're feeling the pressure to conform. That's because in any group, there's this invisible pressure to follow the norms. People are wired to fit in. We don't want to be the odd one out. In school, the pressure to conform is everywhere. It's not just about doing your homework or following the rules. It's about acting, dressing, and even thinking like everyone else just to keep up. Why? Because we all want to be validated. Conformity pressure is one of the strongest forces that keeps us in line with group expectations. Even when we don't fully agree, we often go along with it. That subtle pressure to fit in is driven by our deep need for social validation. When we conform, we receive it, whether through a teacher's praise or a peer's approval. But here's the flip side. Validation doesn't just guide us towards certain behaviors, it also works hand in hand with sanctions. When you step out of line, whether you don't conform or challenge the group's expectations, you risk something even more powerful than rejection. You risk being sanctioned, and that's where the pressure to conform turns into something deeper. It's not just about fitting in, it's also about who's in charge. Social hierarchies exist everywhere, whether we're at home, in school, at work, or in more extreme environments like prisons. In these settings, the balance between validation and sanctioning becomes even more pronounced. Obedience to the hierarchy keeps the social order in place. When you follow the leader, you receive the group's validation. But when you challenge authority or step outside the group's norms, you face consequences. And this is where sanctions come into play. In a prison, the sanctions are more explicit, like solitary confinement or losing privileges that are afforded to other members of society. But what's really important to understand is that sanctions aren't always pronounced or obvious. Sometimes they're quieter, more implicit. Your peers don't need to say anything. You'll feel the shift when the social order isn't respected. The cold shoulder, the avoidance, the lack of trust, these are sanctions too, just as powerful as the formal punishments. So, while we might focus on the obvious moments of punishment, like being sent to detention or losing privileges, it's the hidden social sanctions that often have the most lasting effect. The interplay between validation and sanction is what keeps social hierarchies intact and reinforces group norms. These dynamics are at the core of social accreditation theory. The need for validation drives us to conform, while the fear of sanctions keeps us obedient. Now let's dig into something a little deeper. Tribalism and schismogenesis. Yeah, that's a big word, but it's basically the process where groups become more different over time. Think of it as the fuel behind in-group and out-group dynamics. In schools, cliques form because of shared values or interests. Over time, these groups push further apart, amplifying their differences. The same thing happens in prison systems, but the stakes are higher. Groups band together for survival, and over time their behaviors, rules, and identities become more extreme compared to other groups. This tribalism strengthens the bonds within, while deepening divisions with the outside. Schismogenesis isn't just about differences, it's about competition and even hostility between groups. And this doesn't just happen in prisons and schools. Whether in families, organizations, or entire societies, we see the same dynamic. People stick to their tribes, whether it's social cliques, political affiliations, or even friend groups. The more these groups clash, the more extreme and different they become. So what does this all mean? It means that the dynamics we see in schools or prisons play out on every level of society. At a personal level, we're constantly managing these pressures, fitting in, conforming, and staying in line with social hierarchies. In our relationships, we navigate these same in-group, out-group tensions, deciding who belongs and who doesn't. On a broader cultural level, these forces shape everything, from political movements to social media trends. We see entire groups shift toward extremes as they respond to the validation or sanctions from other groups. And whether we like it or not, the feedback loop between implicit and explicit accreditation keeps these dynamics in motion. So where does that leave us? Social accreditation theory helps us see how these dynamics, conformity, obedience, tribalism, are all connected. The explicit rules we follow are shaped by the implicit pressures we feel. The groups we align with and the people we exclude aren't random. They're all part of this complex system of social accreditation. Once we understand how these forces work, we can start making more intentional choices about who we validate, who we listen to, and how we navigate these invisible rules that shape us. And maybe, just maybe, we can break some of the cycles that keep us divided. Thanks for watching Social Theory today. Join us next time as we explore more about the forces that shape our lives.